Hello and welcome to this iMesh tutorial. So today what I'm going to talk about is not so much about the art side of ArcViz, but more about the business side. I'm going to go over things such as the accounting platforms that I use, and some time tracking, what 3D software I use if you're just starting out in ArcViz and you want to have you don't know what software to use, how to look after mental stress, which is probably the most important thing and people forget about it and nobody talks about it. But it's probably the most important thing, because if you have a mental health breakdown, you're not going to have a career. So that's highly important. And then also about some hardware and stuff, which I find also very important. So let's just get stuck in. Right, so the first point is also something which I never hear people talk about, and that is to use an accounting platform. Because some people, if you're just starting out in ArcViz, you might not have any idea on accounting. And the benefit of using an accounting platform is that they have everything already laid out for you. So in your specific country, they might need invoices to be written in a very specific way. And imagine you spend all year sending invoices to all your clients, you get to the end of the year and you realize you've forgotten a very important piece of information. You have to go back to all of your clients, send them updated invoices, and it just gets very messy and it's very unprofessional. So these platforms allow you to send all of your invoices, create invoices. They tell you which invoices are overdue. You can then send your clients reminders and say, well, where's my money? And you can just keep track over the year of what invoices have been sent. I find that these accounting platforms are so useful, and I've used them from day one and I've never stopped using them. If you're not using them and you want to start in ArcViz, then I highly recommend you check them out. I use this platform called Xero, and it's very helpful, and at my specific country it works wonders, but I don't know if it's in all countries. So just do a really quick Google search for accounting platform online and I'm sure you'll get hit by a million of them for your specific country. Okay, now let's just jump straight to the next one, and that one is to using time tracking. So if my old boss is watching this, then I really have to apologize, because I was the worst time tracker, and he kept having to remind me to keep tracking my time, but I kept forgetting, and since I left, I have been actually really good at tracking my time. It's really, no, I'm really sorry if you're watching, but keeping track of your time is incredibly important, because you get a good idea of how long it takes you to actually make pictures. You might think that it takes you 8 hours to do one image, and then by the end of the month, you think you've done X amount of images over X amount of time. But if you really track your time, you might find that you actually spend 1 hour extra per day making an image than you realize. And by the end of the month, you've spent 20 extra hours than you realize. And that is hours which you've just given away for free. So if you really track all of your hours for all of your projects, you can also get a good idea of which clients take longer time, which clients are very easy, and you can adjust your invoices accordingly to say, well, usually your work takes me an extra 3 days, so I'm gonna start charging you for this. And you do not realize until you really start tracking your time, and you realize that you are just giving away money at that point. So just keep tracking your time. I use a program called Clockify, and it's really good because it can sit on your desktop above all other applications, so that it's always there and you can never miss it. So you do not go to bed and realize and forget, oh, I forgot to turn off my time tracker, because it's right there on the desktop. That's what I really like about it. You can set different projects, so you can tell it which projects you're tracking time for. So if you get up to lunchtime, you're working on one project, you can very quickly switch over to another one for the afternoon and evening. Okay, the next one is one which I really struggle with, and that is corrections and correction rounds. And after all the years in the industry, I always just struggled to say, no, you can't get any more. That was always my biggest problem. But now I've been working for a while, I always now say I only do 3 amends. But this is entirely up to you. I know some people do unlimited amends, but it depends on what rooms you do and usually how long and how many amends you usually get per room. You might work on a very specific type of room which customers completely abuse you, and they will just keep doing amends after amends after amends. But then you might also work in another industry side and realize that people never really ask for amends. So this is really dependent on you. I personally only like to give 3 amends. So I usually make the base room, I send them a very quick draft just to make sure I'm in the right direction. I would then create one final render, I'll do some post-production, then I'll send it to them. They would then send me the amends, and then I would do some amends, then I would send them the next image, up until the final point where it's the final image, and you would say, okay, this is the final one. If you want any more amends, it's going to have to charge you. And one way that I found to make that so much easier to say is to say this at the very beginning of the job, and then use a platform for the corrections. So you could use a program called markup.io, and every time you finished an image, you can post this image in this platform, and then the client can come along and mark the corrections all over the image. They can see that is one round of corrections. Then you do them, and then you post the next image. And it's very, very clear to see how many rounds of amends you've done. Now, if you're sending this by email, for example, they just write you out a list and they say, I want XYZ done. You respond, okay, cool, thank you. They respond, no problem. Then you say, oh, wait, what does this mean? And then they respond, and then before you know it, you're 20 emails deep. Then you get onto the next round of corrections. You get lost how many corrections have been done, and everything is just messy. Emails are a pain for this kind of stuff. So it's highly recommended to use a platform. And not only that, I've had many, many times where a client says, can you add a tree by the door? But then there's 3 doors in the room. So I always have to respond and say, which door do you mean? You know, it might seem clear to them, but unless they actually mark it on the image and say, I want it here, it makes it so much easier, and there's no more back and forth. There's so much time wasted in just written lists. That's if you could just use a platform where they mark it on the image itself, everyone knows where they're up to and everyone is happy. And you can ask for more money if you need it. Not only that, if you're completely going around in circles, you can say to them, okay, join me for a real-time chat, which also is available on these kind of platforms. And then you can talk through the images online, which is also really, really helpful, especially when a client is just completely confused and they have no idea what they're talking about. Okay, so now you have a good idea of how to get paid, how to set out your limits, and how to track your time. So everything is kind of going to be in order there. This is probably going to be a very long video if I don't just jump away from there. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is 3D programs and what I use. If you're just starting out in ArcViz, just listen to this and this should give you some good pointers. So use Blender, it's for free, and it will do everything you mostly want to do, especially if you're just starting out. So I did start out with Blender, and then to get some jobs, I did then learn 3D Studio Max on the side, which made it a lot easier for me because I've already learned Blender, and it's just a case of relearning where all the buttons are because they generally do the same thing. So start out with Blender. If you need to learn 3D Studio Max later, you can do it. It does take some time, but it's a lot easier than just starting out with 3D Studio Max, which you then have to pay a lot of money for. Okay, so and for 3D Studio Max, it's going to cost you about 350 euros if you want to get the indie license, and you can then use 3D Studio Max up to about $100,000 earning per year, which is very good for 3D Studio Max because they're notoriously expensive. But you've then spent 350 euros. It might be slightly different, and then you need a renderer. But there is a renderer built into 3D Studio Max, but in general you don't really see many people using the built-in renderer in 3D Studio Max. So if you want to get a good renderer, that's going to cost you about another 300 euros per year. So at this point, you've spent 650 euros before you've even started. Now imagine you put all of that money in towards learning Blender, doing courses, getting assets and add-ons and everything you need to have a very solid base of everything you need in Blender. So that is something to consider if you're just starting out. I love Blender, and if you need to learn Blender, the community is freaking huge, and I guarantee if you have any question, the question's already been asked 100 times. And starting out in ArcViz, we have a bunch of tutorials on our YouTube which you can learn how to make it all work. So yeah, check out Blender, it's free, just do it. Okay, the next thing is something which people hear me preaching about all the time, and that is using mood boards. I'm just going to breeze over this, but basically use mood boards. You're not going to be as good as other people, especially when you're just starting out. Use their images as inspiration to help you make your images better. So I use Pinterest and I just use it all the time. I just browse, and if there's some images I like, I make some new boards, and then I collect all of my images together. So then when I actually get to a project, I use a program called PureRef, which is a very lightweight program. You can just drag in all your images into there, and then that can give you your images on the side next to while you're working, so you can just see them all the time. Okay, if you are using Blender and you're not using add-ons, then I think you're doing it wrong, honestly. So Blender is open source, and there are tons and tons of free add-ons. There's no reason why you shouldn't be using them, because I guarantee if there's a problem and you think, wow, this is taking me a long time to do this one specific task, somebody has made an add-on to do that task. I guarantee it. there's an add-on for everything, and there's add-ons which come pre-built in with Blender. You can just search through them, see which ones help you out, and I guarantee you'll save so much time. So I released a YouTube video the other day which was talking about collections, and making collections is quite complicated. You have to add things to collections. You then have to add the collection to the scene. You can hide the original object. You then have to set the origin to the right point. Or what you can do is use an add-on, and it just is then one shortcut key, Control G, and then that's all done for you. So you can imagine the time saving on all of these things. Just check out add-ons, check out Blender Market, and look through all of their add-on section there and see what takes your fancy. Okay, and it wouldn't be an iMesh video if it wasn't going to mention 3D models, and this isn't so much about our own models, but if you want to do ArcViz, you should pay for your 3D models. There are tons of free resources, there are paid resources. Don't waste your time making them yourself. I think that it is good to know how to make models and to learn the basics of modeling, because I guarantee you'll have a customer which wants you to modify certain furniture or to make certain specific bespoke furniture, but in general, it is a huge waste of time to model every single piece of furniture for your own images. I always use this analogy. So let's say you have a client and they come to you and say, I want you to make me a 3D image of this room. And at the same time, they go to a photographer and say, can you photograph this room for me? The photographer then turns to them and says, okay, sure, but you're gonna have to give me 2 more months because I need to build all the furniture so I can photograph it. That just doesn't happen. Photographers are photographers. They are not carpenters or furniture makers. That is the same in ArcViz. If you want to do ArcViz, learn how to make good images, how to set good moods, learn composition and lighting, and make good images. Don't waste your time making furniture, because by the time you get good enough at making furniture, you've just wasted, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of hours that you could have been putting into ArcViz to be getting next level images. I've worked in studios. Nobody builds their own furniture, just pay for furniture. If you want some furniture, then check out iMesh. We have 1,400 assets at the moment of making this video. It's all for $99, which is actually freaking cheap, because if you want to buy models, usually they cost around $5 to $20. So that would cost you around $10,000 worth of money. And we just give you the instant library to get started. So check out iMesh. Right, that's enough for that. Right, let's move on. The next thing you should be doing if you're doing ArcViz is post-production to some level. So if you make an image and you save the image, there's always something you can do to the image to make it better. I use Photoshop, but you can use Affinity Photo. So Affinity Photo is much cheaper than Photoshop, but I've just learned to use Photoshop over the years, and that is just my baby. I love Photoshop, but check out Affinity Photo, because I believe it's a one-off payment for life, and then you just get updates and updates, which is very unique for a professional piece of software like that. So check that out, and then also check out on YouTube some tips and tricks for doing post-production for your images. There's usually just very simple ways to give your images a boost, just a slight color correction, just a little bit of contrast, and I guarantee it will look better than just saving it out as it is. Okay, so let's talk about mental stress and mental health. And for some reason, people don't like to talk about it, or people just kind of breeze over it and think, oh, well, I'm going to be fine. But it's so important, because if you don't control your level of work, you could have a burnout and you could end up losing your career because you can't possibly work on any more work. I've had many burnouts in the past, and it's probably going to take me a long time to physically recover. I have anxiety, and there's times where I can't sleep, and I feel like if there's just one job too much, I can be pushed over the edge because I've been there so many times. I wish I could go back and restructure my life to make sure that this never happens. It's so important. So there's just some very basic things that you can just make sure that you do. And the first thing I'm going to say is ask your clients for extended time if you need it. So in the art industry and in the creative industry, deadlines get pushed back all the time. I know that if you just get a new client, you want to impress them, you don't want to be delayed, but this happens all the time. Things get delayed. The worst thing that can happen is you ask them and they say, no, there's no time. The best thing is that you ask them and they say yes, Then you sleep that night and you think, holy shit, I have like 3 more days, I can relax. And that feeling is better than anything else. So ask for more time. The next thing is sleep. And this might seem obvious, but for me personally, I have a problem with putting things down, especially if it's going wrong. And that happens a lot, especially when you're starting out. Things go wrong all the time. And if it gets to like midnight and I think I'm so close to finding the answer, I will work till 3, 4, 5 a.m. until that problem is solved. And by the end of it, I'm hungry because at that point my stomach is ready for breakfast. I need to sleep somehow. And then you wake up the next day completely fried. But I do also guarantee that if you go to bed a little bit earlier, the problem you've been working on for 3, 4 hours, you will solve within 10 minutes of waking up. Every single time. Like, I don't know, there should be a rule, and I don't hear people mentioning this, maybe it's just me, but if I force myself to go to bed on a problem, I feel like your brain is just figuring it out while you sleep, and you wake up and you say, well, why don't I try this? And then it works, and you think, holy crap, I have just saved myself like 3 hours of sleep, and things are just better. I can't stress enough how much importance sleep is, and just go to sleep, and worst case, work until you're at the point where you could probably sleep. Just go to sleep and just get up a little bit earlier. If the deadline is the next day, just get up like 3 hours earlier. You'll have a way more productive morning. By the time you get in towards the end of the evening, things will start getting stress-free because you almost finished the project, and then you can sleep that night. Rather than completely working all the way through the night, being burnt out, and then needing to sleep 2 days to catch up from the previous night. Okay, another thing which I try to do occasionally, I haven't made a good routine out of this, but I really should do, and that is meditation. And I think that one is very powerful, and I don't know why I don't do it as much as I wish that I should do it. So if you've just woken up, you're about to have a very stressful day, you know it's going to be very, very tough, sit in the living room, put on a YouTube guided meditation, and usually it's just 10 minutes long, and I guarantee you'll feel way more relaxed than you ever have. The benefit with meditation is that it teaches your brain how to deal with stressful situations. It allows you to take those stressful thoughts and put them aside so you can deal with the project at hand. And over time, it allows you to deal with stress in such a much more efficient way than letting things just completely pile on top of you. Okay, so that's probably it for mental stress. I'm sure that other people have many other tips, and you're not alone. If you do want to ask for any tips, actually just email Imesh. Like, I'm 100% up for just talking to people and trying to help them out because I've been there and I know the impact it can have on your whole life. So just email Imesh if you need some help. And yeah, so on to the next thing. So that is hardware. I'm going to start off with something, and that's going to be your office chair. So I used to sit on this horrible blue chair that was ripped. It was creaky and it didn't support my back in any way, and I don't know how, but I sat on this chair for thousands of hours, and it wasn't until I recently got a new chair that I realized, holy shit, my back needed this. And getting older, I'm now 30, that I realized the importance of these things. So get a good chair. At least there are some cheaper IKEA chairs which do have a more focus on ergonomics. So at least just get a chair which helps in some way if you can. I know this hardware section is a little bit more tricky because it does cost some money for these things, but the investment, you hear all the time, the investment of my back is worth more than, I don't know, than any job, I guess. Right, the next thing is hardware on your computer, and I would say for Blender the most important hardware is probably the graphics card, and also having a very fast hard drive. For me, I also like to have a very fast CPU, but the CPUs can cost a lot and they start adding up quite quickly. If you have a higher core CPU and you can afford a higher core CPU, then go for that, because if your GPU fails because it's run out of VRAM, usually your computer will have more RAM, and then you can render it on your CPU. It will be slower, but at least you can get the job done. So having a decent CPU helps, but for getting a good GPU in Blender is very important. If you have two options, so I know there's the 3060, the RTX 3060, there's a 6GB option, or an 8GB option, or a 12GB option. Always go for the 12GB option. You have a problem in Blender with VRAM, so get a graphics card with as much VRAM as you can get. There are many guides online, and people talk about hardware in general for Blender, so I'm not going to go into the actual computer side of things too much, but that is my recommendation. A good GPU with a lot of VRAM. Okay, and the next thing is peripherals and stuff like this, and having good monitors. So I have quite a cheap monitor, to be fair, but I have used a color checker on it, a color calibrator, to make sure the colors are all correct, and I have a second smaller monitor to the side, and that one is more for just my mood boards, my social media, my Spotify, and it's just helpful to have a second screen, because sometimes you might be working on two things at once, and it's just nice to have a lot of real estate for your eyes. I also have a good mouse, so it's a it's a bit dirty. It's a Logitech, yeah, it's a Logitech MX Master, and that is one that people always rave about, and it's the best mouse I've ever had by far. I really love it. And what else do I have? Keyboard. So I now have a good mechanical keyboard, which you can now hear in all my videos, because I need to damp it out or get new the mechanical keyboard guys are going to kill me, but the clickers, I forgot the word. The clicky bits. I need to get quieter clicky bits. And I used to have a very terrible keyboard, and keys kept getting stuck, and that was not very useful, especially when the shift gets stuck and then sticky keys pops up and all this other stuff. But now this keyboard is very joyful, and when you're using Blender with hotkeys are very important in Blender, that having a good keyboard, I guess, is very important. But yeah, that I probably would say is probably it for this video. I hope that there are some tips that have helped you, and I genuinely hope that I've given you some, I genuinely hope I've given you some good tips. And like I say, if you need any help, message iMesh, and we can just have a chat. Maybe I can help you out. But anyway, have a very good day. I hope you can sleep well, get some sleep, get well prepared, tell your clients no if they're asking for too much, and good luck in your career.